Hello, I am Dr. Skerdi Faria, founder of Keit Hospital. Today I want to talk about a phenomenon that's being seen more and more in aesthetic medicine and surgery, the moment when aesthetic improvement no longer translates into well-being. This phenomenon isn't a diagnosis in itself, but it's a clear pattern seen in people who've had several aesthetic treatments or procedures, often over a significant period of time. Instead of feeling more at peace, more satisfied, or more confident, they experience disappointment, emotional fatigue, and a vague sense of detachment from their appearance. The change is visible, but the feeling of well-being is missing. What makes this topic especially important in aesthetic medicine and surgery is the fact that this process doesn't start with excess. It usually starts with a reasonable request, a small correction, a well-thought-out procedure. But the problem isn't the first treatment. The problem arises when aesthetic correction turns into a constant effort to achieve inner peace, instead of remaining a limited and clear choice. In the early stages, most patients feel good. There's relief, calm, sometimes even enthusiasm. Over time, this feeling fades. The result loses its emotional weight much faster than the appearance changes. The mirror no longer brings confidence. Attention shifts from improvement to maintenance, from maintenance to correction, and then to the fear of some imagined future change. This is exactly where the balance between aesthetics and well-being begins to break down. From the perspective of aesthetic medicine and surgery, this condition often manifests through certain repeated phrases. I've done everything right, but I still don't feel good. I look better, but I don't feel like myself. I don't know what else to change, but something continues to bother me. These aren't just random sentences. They show a clear mismatch between external change and internal experience. An important factor is the accumulation of procedures over time. Each procedure taken individually might be reasonable and correctly performed. But when treatments are layered without a clear stopping point, the body risks being seen as an endless process, not a whole. The face, chest, or physique are no longer perceived as a harmony, but as separate areas requiring constant attention. Another essential element is the gradual change in expectations. The first result seems significant. The second seems less so. After several procedures, the threshold of satisfaction shifts. More and more is required, while the satisfaction gained is shorter and shorter. Even objectively good results can be experienced as disappointing, not because they're insufficient, but because the emotional experience has changed. The influence of social media is undeniable. Edited images, faces overloaded with filters, and constant comparisons create the idea that improvement should be continuous and effortless. When the body doesn't follow this logic, disappointment arises. Over time, this does not increase personal confidence. It adds to the emotional burden. A significant sign of this condition is the request to undo previous changes, people seeking to remove implants or return to a more neutral look. Not because the procedures were done wrong, but because their accumulation no longer feels right. The phrase, "I want to look normal," carries a special weight. It shows that the goal has shifted from improvement to restoring the sense of self. When this condition is not diagnosed in time in aesthetic medicine and surgery, the risk increases. Continuing interventions on a person who is already emotionally drained by the aesthetic journey can deepen dissatisfaction, increase fixation, and damage trust. At this stage, even a perfectly performed procedure may not bring true benefit. And here, the doctor's responsibility in aesthetic medicine and surgery becomes crucial. The ability to intervene is not the same as the obligation to intervene. There are cases where the most correct choice is to stop. Listening becomes more important than correcting. There are some signals that require increased care. Frequent interventions with shorter and shorter satisfaction. Unclear requests instead of clear objectives. Constant focus on maintenance rather than a finished result. Lack of emotional response even after good results. Or the feeling that the person is no longer sure why they seek treatment, but finds it hard to stop. It is important to emphasize that this condition is not the same as body dysmorphic disorder. They can coexist, but they are not the same. Here we are talking more about emotional exhaustion than a distortion of perception. The person may see themselves realistically but feel tired and detached from the aesthetic process. From an ethical standpoint, this places a clear responsibility on the doctor. Sometimes the most correct decision is to say not now, not like this, or let's stop. This is not a refusal, it is care. Aesthetic medicine and surgery must have a stopping point. Improvement should not turn into a permanent state of correction. When this happens, it ceases to be helpful and begins to consume. The goal is not limitless perfection, but a stable balance between appearance and well-being. Restoring this well-being does not come from another intervention. It comes from revising expectations. It's from restoring the sense of identity. and in some cases, from allowing the body to exist without treatments. For some people, a period without intervention is the healthiest choice. This requires honest communication. People seeking treatments deserve clarity. They must understand that more intervention does not necessarily mean a better result, and that dissatisfaction does not always imply a physical problem. Sometimes it simply shows that the internal balance is compromised. In conclusion, when aesthetic improvement no longer translates into well-being, aesthetic medicine and surgery have a duty to stop and reflect. A conscious approach is not measured by how much we can do, but by the ability to understand when it's right not to do more. The doctor's role is not to change the body without limits, but to protect the individual's well-being in the long term. Sometimes this means slowing down and redefining what improvement really means. Thank you for listening.